Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Kazuto, Kato, Bartha, and myself, and the whole Regulatory and Ethics Working Group, we're about to go on a very quick adventure because we want to make sure we have time for some questions to get comments on what we have been doing in the last year. So the mandate of the Regulatory and Ethics and Working Group is written right there. You can see it. How to put all this in action with a group of diverse, multidisciplinary volunteers from 9 different countries. That was our challenge, interoperability in multidisciplinarity. You can see the membership on the, the membership was there. And you can also see that we have IT specialists, patient advocates, and clinicians and so on. We did not want to be a top-down sort of think tank. We did, however, create a number of, now we're having the, problem again. There we go. Task teams, this is all Global Alliance language. These are the groups then that actually do the work. We had one on consent that immediately responded to your request in London. London people said, please give us clauses. What do we do about legacy consents? How do we move forward if we want to take the Global Alliance vision and actually already incorporate it into actual and future projects? What about all this data protection regulation? What's happening in Europe? It seems to be going very conservative. There seems to be a need for an explicit, specific consent for everything. And what kind of work can the Alliance do to make sure that research and the benefits of research are recognized while protecting privacy? Data safe havens, together with the security working group, a whole concept. Are there entities that have particular attributes of both privacy and security that then could be considered as a safe place to store and share data? Ethics Safe Harbor Review. This is a long-term project. This is a dream, actually. You have to dream in these things, as David just mentioned. Could we one day envisage that for international consortia, we could have a streamlined, participatory, but a streamlined portal for international ethics review? The framework, which I'll get to in a minute, which David already mentioned, and a new task team just formed last week on privacy and security policy. Now, here we go. I have a couple slides with names on it. There are many, many people in addition to the REWG executive members, and that's why I put their names down. I want to thank them, those who are here. Thank you for being here, and those who aren't here. It's important, I think, that you be recognized as well. There's a lot of people working behind the scenes. Pardon? And from many, yes, as Kazuto mentioned, we make a particular effort to deliberately go out and seek persons with expertise from many different countries. So the progress in the first year has been obviously the task teams that were created, the increasing membership as members come forward and want to join. We ask them where they'd like to work, and they're on the phone calls. We've been discussing various national laws. What happens if countries such as China or Japan adopt legislation on data protection? How will that affect data sharing? Lobbying with the European Parliament. This resulted in an article in The Lancet 2 weeks ago, publication in Genome Biology about what has the commercial sector done to be interoperable, harmonized, effective, economical, and ethical. Can we do something with equivalency when one country recognizes the ethical review process of another country as being equivalent, or same for data protection? And finally, we did put up the clauses and the templates that you asked for in London, super plain English. In fact, we had a call from industry thanking us for doing it because they're thinking of using it. And we are now finished with the framework which can be amended at any time, as you know. Well, this is the way the ethics policy legal community works. We go forward and forward and forward through many different steps, many meetings, many discussions. We actually had 10 versions of the framework. And I'd like to, in particular, thank Edward Dove, the coordinator of the REWG, who was pivotal, essential, and remained calm and patient through the whole process. Policy people like to talk. So, and even more so, as you will see in a minute, we succeeded in having the framework translated by volunteers. Those of you out here who did it, merci beaucoup. And we are now going to be published this week, open access in the Hugo Journal. The framework will be published. Perhaps even today. We're waiting for news. Well, if it's not going to go, then I will just continue.
Somewhere.
Sorry, hold it up. Aha.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I'm the least techie person you'll ever meet. So these are all the different organizations. There's 15 of them who came to the meetings, who participated. Add on to that another 100 individuals who sent in their comments. So we really tried to integrate all the different perspectives and concerns. Now we're totally, Okay, so the first real point of not contention but discussion was, how do we define our foundational principles? Particularly, as David mentioned, we're very much concerned with representing diverse worldviews, cultures, values, and so on, while taking as our fundamental starting point respect for individuals, families, communities, advancing the scientific research, promoting the benefits, and fostering trust and reciprocity. So we decided not to describe them. In fact, we thought that at the end that they were more powerful if they stood there naked, so to speak, and every culture, every community, every scientist, every regulator could actually see their own scientific endeavor in light of those principles. We then developed the core elements. Each of these core elements has procedural mechanisms. If you go to the framework, you'll get some high-level how-to-do elements in the framework itself. Now, as I mentioned, it was translated into 5 languages, and David stressed the point. What we decided to do, and this is after about 25 years that Kazuto and I and others in this group have been involved in policymaking, is not to go your typical sort of ethics route, actually to go and take a novel approach, which is basing it not only on the Universal Declaration, Article 27, which has been mentioned, but also to take those two rights, the right to benefit from and the right to be recognized for, and look at the international convention that was actually adopted after the declaration and that put this into a political convention that was ratified and signed by 162 countries. So this gives these two rights actionability in the domestic national sense as well. So we'll have to see how this new sort of way of framing policy works and how we can be actionable and active. And we started with another discussion. We said we are talking about data that has been approved for sharing. So we didn't get stuck in all the local definitions of consent, required consent, implicit consent, dynamic consent, and all the rest of it. We just said it's been approved. And this is where the framework starts. There we are. Arabic, French, Spanish, Japanese, thank you. So and I think there's another language coming next week probably. Then our other political move, if you can say it that way, sorry to describe it like that, David, was to make sure that the framework formed part of the Constitution. If you're belonging to an alliance, it's very free, very open, very dynamic, epigenetic, and the rest of it. What does it mean? What does it mean? There has to be some common ethos, some common philosophy of how are we going to move science forward, how we're going to be more federated, integrated, harmonized, and so on what basis? And so we ask that the framework be part of the Constitution itself. It doesn't mean you have to share. In fact, there is an article that says that you do not have to be a data sharing member to be a member. But if you are a member, this is the framing of what we hope to do and the governance underpinnings that accompany it. Oops. So what are we doing right now? Well, now we're turning to, let's take the framework and start developing policies that are more procedural, that people can use as working tools. So we're going now to do consent to secondary uses, not what kind of consent, but rather how to go further with helping researchers for secondary use in data sharing, a safe haven, what are the attributes, what does it mean, points to consider on ethics equivalency, and of course, working with the 3 major projects. These are our partners in crime, if I can call it that, and we are there to support them and make sure that these projects go forward from a regulatory ethics point of view. And finally, we've just finished our work with the security working group as well with Dixie and Kazuto. Now, to be coherent and consistent, we have to not have policies all over the place. We wanted to develop a framework for the policies, a template, so that they could be interoperable in some sort of way. So you start with the framework, and then you say, okay, for my consent policy, what are the principles I can pull out of the framework, and what additional principles are specific to the consent discussion? Then develop the policy with the procedural mechanisms, similarly for privacy and security and so on. So you might want to take, for instance, the principle of engagement for consent and tease out some further elements, and you might want to add some other principles. Similarly for privacy, you might want to take out integrity and add some additional elements and so on. So finally, for the future, I know I'm going at the speed of light, but I want to make sure we have questions. We're going to hold a brochure meeting on linkage. We're doing grant applications as fast as we can. We're working with our colleagues, as I said, on the different working groups, and we're examining some new topics as well, and possibly the creation of another task team on ethics and governance in particular. So I'd like to conclude by quoting from a UNESCO document, a UNESCO instrument, concentrating on the right to enjoy the benefits of scientific progress. So let's move away from the over-concentration on risks and harms and actually say, how can we maximize the benefits? Since the Venice Statement of 2009, that the duty to respect this right includes respecting the freedom of the scientific community and individual members to collaborate with others both within and across countries' borders, including the free exchange of information, research ideas, and results. And I think that best represents one of the many goals of the Global Alliance and of the Regulatory Ethics and Working Group. Thank you.
So we do have time for questions, and with all of these presentations, we're going to have, we asked the leaders to speak for 15 minutes and have open discussion. So we don't want to create the wrong culture just because Keith and I didn't do that. And so let's get started. Are there questions, comments of any sort for Bartha and Kazuto?
Well, okay, good.
Please go ahead. And everyone introduce yourselves just so we're getting to know each other still.
Yeah, I'm Bob Cook-Deegan from Duke. Bartha and Kazuto, could you tell us, the Nagoya Protocol went into effect last week, as I understand it, and it looks like it maps to some of the stuff that you guys have been working on. Could you tell us a little bit about, we've got this new international treaty with checkpoints in it about benefit sharing and informed consent. How does that map to what you guys are doing?
Sure.
As a researcher, I will answer. We need to do further research. Bob, both Kazuto and I have been on the road the last 5 days, so I haven't been able to check into how it maps onto it. Do you know, Bob, if you want to go back to the mic? Now, the treaty was at a formally signed treaty by different countries, and it would map on to the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Rights. Yeah.
So I don't know what it means either, Bartha. It was truly an innocent question. I know it went into effect. Enough countries just in the last 2 weeks ratified it, so it has gone into effect. And it's going to mandate informed consent rules, and there are going to be checkpoints for use of genetic resources. Right. But I don't know what that means. And it seems like maybe something we need to do.
My understanding is that it's more about the non-human data. So I think how we can coordinate the sharing of human data and non-human data is one of the things we have to look into.
I'm going to use, is there a game show where you have helplines, right?
Yeah, does anyone, I was going to
Okay.
say, let's just note that the things
Yeah.
we do here are we convene, we came together,
Yeah.
we serve as a clearinghouse, we've just identified some information we need. Does anyone in the room actually know about this, that they
Well-
could tell us more?
Well, while we wait for someone to go to the mic, in 1992, the Rio Convention, which is also on plant and animal bioresources, had the same effect of sort of a spillover into the human domain. So, Ted, do you know if this is a biological resource convention? Or humans were explicitly excluded from the Rio Convention? Okay, so that's the
right,
Rio
yes,
Convention.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, but so
that's it, Bob?
But we should look at it. And I think in addition, one of the questions I have actually, maybe you could comment, is there are other things, obviously, will always be other things going on at all time, too, that relate to what we're doing. Two that I've been aware of, there may be others people in the room want to point to, but one is the look at the common rule in America, where there's a lot of discussion about that, and also in the EU Privacy Directive. So can you comment on both specifically, what are things out there right now that your group is particularly watching or worrying about or thinking might have a big impact on the work of the Global Alliance in terms of national policies or things like that?
I think the area about the protection of personal data is, as we already know, is quite an important area. We have to watch carefully, not only about EU, but also, of course, in the EU and the US, but also other areas of the world.
Yeah, as you know, you could see from the Lancet article reference I put up there, it's a continuing, how do I call it, sort of a volleyball going on, if not to denigrate in any way the political system. But as you know, EU presidencies change every 6 months, and the countries keep coming in to change the different articles. Particularly, there was originally a research exemption in the first draft done by the European Commission, and it then went to a very conservative, you need explicit specific consent for every data use. Right. And now it's again come back to a more open position. There's also the terrific, I'll say it, NIH genome data sharing policy that just came out, something to look at, where they actually answer a lot of the questions and queries that people have.
So I think that one thing, I'm going to move on to the next question, one thing I think for the people in the room and for this group is, if you see things going on in your organization, your country, your domain, that you think that we should be keeping an eye on, please let
Particularly, we like to hear more about so-called non-Western part of the world, what's going on about data protection.
So please feed that information so we can try and integrate it. And the other is, we are going to try and make the Global Alliance, we are making it as hopefully a source of information about these topics. And so, for example, our Twitter feed opened yesterday, and we're not going to use the Twitter feed to offer opinions about all sorts of stuff, but more try and become information that would be relevant to people in this domain, be able to pass it along and draw attention to it. So that's the idea of a clearinghouse. The next question, please.
Mark Lawler from Queen's University, Belfast. And just to add really to the last comment, just in relation to the European directive, which obviously we're all worried about, obviously there's a huge opportunity at the moment with the new commissioner coming in because of the elections, and certainly a number of institutions and organisations have been lobbying. I'm a member of the European Alliance for Personalised Medicine, and we've been lobbying very strongly in relation to that, because obviously that's another issue, or another opportunity really for us to go back to what the original wording was, which, as you said, was much more stable. I think it is, though, a challenge that we have to constantly keep our eye on, and certainly, moving forward, it is something that if we can achieve it properly, it really can make a difference to all the type of initiatives we're talking about.
That's great. Tom? Come to the microphone if you want to ask a question, but Tom?
I'm just curious for what you're thinking, or your group is thinking on the data safe havens. I represent the International Cancer Genome Consortium, which has data in 18 countries, massive data, and we are facing mega problems with trying to get this data reanalyzed comprehensively. And if there were places in the world where there were safe havens where we could put the data, and for the user community to access would be wonderful. Today we face some countries, some data sets cannot go into academic clouds, and some cannot go into any clouds. Some can only stay in certain countries, but not others. I think we do need a place which is really recognized by many countries, or all countries, as being a place where at least some data sets can be deposited for the research community.
Well, I guess we are not in the position of envisioning just single safe haven territory, and we have to keep working on how we really store, where we store DNA to make a safe haven type of activities.
Let's
Yeah,
take.
we deposited and submitted, an article on the 12 attributes that certain members of the REWG and members of other working groups thought constituted, by putting together the history of this confusing and often overused or misunderstood concept, to a journal last week, trying to, one, if we establish what the conditions that could be recognized, if the Global Alliance then decides to maybe look at it and say, this fits in with what we want to do, and then we would have some clarity. That's exactly what is needed.
Yeah, no, and it is a huge issue with a lot of in the human genetics domain, where there are many international collaborations where people put data together. The more scrutiny comes to it, that people say, maybe the things that we did that made papers come together, we should stop doing because we can't put it together anymore, and then we'll stop learning. So we're going to take 3 more questions. First one there, and then there'll be 2 over here.
Hello, I'm Eric Scott from the Scripps Research Institute, and I was wondering if you've explored the human right of someone to share or have control of their own data, which would allow them to share data with anyone, say internationally, but also to remove their data from any databases, maybe accepting a central archive.
Don't know if, and I'm usually an idealist, but I'm not sure if a central archive, as Kazuto said, probably more of a federated model due to the constrictions and constraints. The Personal Genome Project, in a way, George Church's project, exemplifies what you're saying, where people put their genome out there, and I presume, knowing the project, that they can withdraw it when they want. So that kind of, I'm out there, who else wants to, it's possible. The right to withdraw is an absolute sine qua non for any kind of research, as you know. That is,
But currently, it's very difficult for patients to remove their data.
Right, well,
it's very difficult, sorry?
It's possibly impossible or very difficult for patients to remove their data from any data set. So if you participated in,
from
say,
a
the Women's
data
Health
set.
Initiative,
Yes.
and you
yes.
don't want your data in dbGaP.
Yes, well, the rules for withdrawal, there's usually 3 options. One is stop using it from now, X date. The other is you may use it, but only anonymized, no more clinical, no more anything will come up, we won't update it. And the other one is you cannot remove data from data sets that have already been published or used, and that's just a common sense rule.
hey, we're going to have to keep moving on. Take another question here.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Ahmed Fahmy. I am representing UNESCO here. Thank you for pointing out the declaration that UNESCO was involved in drafting 2009. I wanted just to point out that last September there was an important meeting that was held in Paris in UNESCO with the Intergovernmental Bioethics Committee and UNESCO's International Bioethical Committee on basically the revision of the 1974 Convention of Scientific Researchers and the sharing of genetic data. And this is basically a discussion that was held in light of the Ebola crisis in West Africa. And there is now a real strong consensus from the UNESCO member states, 192 and 93 countries now, to see how we could revise this, and given the new kind of global changes that we're seeing. So I really would recommend that somehow what you're trying to do is in sync with the intergovernmental bioethics community.
Can we ask you to help make that connection? So
Yeah,
we
of course,
can,
we will
That's
talk
great.
in break. Yes.
No, that's why we're here. That's great. Thank you very much. That's a very important point. David?
David Glazer, Google. Not a question, just comment. It's live in the Hugo Journal. I checked all your
Excellent.
comments.
All right.
Thank you.
So I want to, we have 2 minutes left. I just want to say the comments that have been made, the last one about UNESCO, the ones about, that is one of the reasons we come together in person, is so people can make these comments and we can identify these connections. I want to ask in the remaining 2 minutes before we move on to the next section, is there anyone else in the audience who would like to either suggest a topic for consideration, not that we're going to be able, we're going to put them on the spot to do everything, but a topic for consideration that they haven't heard this group, and we're going to ask this of all the groups, is doing that you'd like them to consider, or another connection of the sort we just heard for UNESCO or what have you, where a connection should be made. We don't want to lose this opportunity to hear from you things that we aren't doing that we should be, which is different than the things we are doing. Are they doing well? All right, well, don't say we didn't ask. Okay, the next, thank you very much, Bartha, Kazuto, and Partha, who's not here. That was terrific.